provide exceptional representation and counsel to the mayor, the council, and the agencies of the District of Columbia. That's our statutory responsibility. Our statute, thankfully, also requires us to use the law in the public interest. Now, we've run like crazy with that second part of our statutory obligation, and so we've been quite innovative and creative, and frankly pushing the envelope by using the law to help the district's most vulnerable residents. When you talk about vulnerable residents, it starts with kids in the District of Columbia. Let me tell you, development is great. Those cranes up there in the sky, nice. The state of kids in DC don't follow the state of development in the District of Columbia. Trickle down has not trickled down to poor kids in the District of Columbia, particularly poor kids who live across the river, Ward 7, Ward 8, and in pockets of Ward 5 and certainly in Ward 4 as well. So what we try to do every day in our office is think creatively about how we can use the law to help kids get on the right path. Imagine right now a kid who lives in an area of the District of Columbia, and there are many such kids, where the unemployment rate is high. Imagine that kid also lives in an area where, generally speaking, the public schools are the worst in the District of Columbia. Now, there are more public schools that are improving, which is good, but just imagine that kid's life. Unemployment, high unemployment, bad schools, violence, gunshots, every day. Any of you ever gone to a school and ask the class, maybe about 40 or 50 like you all, hey, do you know anyone who's been shot? Do you know how many hands go up? Let me ask a question of you. Do you know anyone in the District of Columbia that's been shot? I got it. That's a lot of hands. The kids were here, 70% of those kids would raise their hand, okay? So imagine a kid on high unemployment, poor school, violence like crazy, dysfunction in the household, right? What are the chances that that kid is gonna be able to overcome all of those aspects of trauma in order to go to college? Very low. And we do celebrate, and we should celebrate, that kid or those kids, those dozen kids who somehow, some way get the additional support they need, or persevere and are tenacious, and are essentially accomplishing a Herculean task, right? Mm-hmm. Well, why would you ever require a kid to be Hercules in order to have just a basic middle-class life? So I'm here to tell you that if you're a young Democrat in the District of Columbia and you're not focused on the plight of young, vulnerable kids, I'm encouraging you to do that, okay? Because there's so much that can be done. So here's what we do. We prosecute juveniles in the District of Columbia, the exclusive prosecutor of kids. When we got there, we studied what my predecessor had done, and his view was maximal prosecution of kids, so zero tolerance. Guess what happens? When you prosecute kids maximally, then those kids who are found to be involved, that's the terminology in the juvenile system, found to be involved, those kids are either placed on probation, go to a group home, committed to DYRS, go to kid jail, or removed outside of the jurisdiction to another facility, again, outside of DC. Do you know what the rate of recidivism is for those kids who go on probation, group home, kid jail, or moved out of state?
95?
About 60%. Okay?
Good.
Do you know how much the cost for 1 year of probation, group home, or DYRS commitment is? Anywhere from $35,000 to $75,000. The outcomes suck, right? That fair? Anybody think a 60% rate of recidivism is a success? No. Is this a group that talks?
Yeah.
It's okay if you don't, I just want to know, that's all. So we play big in the area of criminal justice reform, particularly around kids, because we have a lot of jurisdiction, and being exclusive means you basically can do what you want to do. All right, so what have we done? We're partnered with the Department of Human Services, a wonderful lady, one of my best friends in government named Hillary Cairns, runs a great diversion program. That program gets underneath the why and the cause of the problem, assesses kids for all kinds of trauma, then matches up the services that the kids might need in order to build resilience to overcome the trauma. So we have diverted over 2,500 kids, 1,760 or so graduates of the program, 6-month intensive program. You get to ask, right? I'm talking about outcomes. Hey, what are your outcomes? Okay, so right now, 79% of those kids, of that 1,760, 79% have not been rearrested. You can get rearrested out here for being black and selling water at a park. So that's a big number, okay? 79% not been rearrested. What that actually means is that not only are those kids not engaging in activities that they were previously engaging in, but importantly, right, they're not even hanging with the people who they used to hang with, who, if they did, they would be in the zone of getting arrested. And I'm happy to answer your questions a little bit later, if that was a question sign. All right, so that's one piece of innovation in the criminal justice system. I'll talk about a couple more, then I'll finish. Number one. Number two, the restorative justice. Anybody familiar here with restorative justice?
Yes.
You want to tell me what the principle is?
Yes, the principle is to undo harm. So we don't want to use extreme consequences for anybody, because we don't want to create recidivism, as you said. So the purpose of it is to not send people to jail for things that could possibly have a diversion, basically.
There you go. So I think you almost nailed it all the way, and I hope that you're taping this for your television show. It's pretty crazy. She's certainly not taping me. At any rate, so restorative justice is all that, and really specifically, it's a revolutionary idea about putting the victim together with the alleged perpetrator in a way so that the victim can fully participate in the process. Court, I got to tell you, as a public defender, as a criminal defense lawyer, is not necessarily, kind and nice to witnesses or victims. The process is clumsy, it's time-consuming, and you're needed if you're a witness for your testimony, and that's it. As a victim, you might be needed at the end of the day for testimony and a victim impact statement, but there's so many uncertainties and discomforts being a victim in the criminal justice system. Restorative justice gives the victim, a willing victim, the keys. It says, here it is. We can go through this process. You get to ask questions. You get to, at the end of the day, come up with a contract proposal. And sure enough, the alleged perpetrator must sign that contract and then make you whole in some way consistent with what you think you need to be made whole. So we've done about 90 of those cases. We're the only prosecutor's office in the country that has a restorative justice program in the office. And I tell you, we get calls all the time to go down and train other prosecutor offices who are interested in doing the same thing. All right, again, so far, 90 is not a large sample size, so I don't like to publicly talk about numbers per se, but we're well over 80% in terms of kids completing the restorative justice circles and completing the contract and not getting arrested. It's a big deal. The last thing I'll talk about, the reason why I'm talking about crime is because there's been a serious spike in murders. 2018, 53% increase over 2017. This year, we're trending at about 58% increase year-to-date number of murders over last year. And I'm harping on this because violence, particularly in those areas that I'm talking about, is really, really causing serious trauma to kids.